Welcome to another episode of the Chronic Comeback Podcast. Today I have on the show Angie Hepp. How are you doing, Angie? How are you today?
I'm amazing. Thank you so much for having me.
No, and I'm again. I feel like I'm doing this a little bit too often at the moment. Apologizing to get guests for keeping them hanging for a long time, but we've been talking on and off, and I think you reached out a while ago, and I've wanted to get you on the show for like a long time, but yeah, but due to a number of availability reasons on my end, we haven't been able to make it happen. But super excited that we can do that now. What I'd love to do is to go back like earlier on in your life, potentially before you had any like real issues, if there was a time. And if you could, yeah, take us back into those early years and like how life was like from a health perspective then, if there were any like early telltale signs of potential health issues. And then if you could take us through that initial part of when maybe your health you start to have issues with your health.
Yeah. So when I think back, a lot of and this is a sign in and of itself, there's a lot of gaps in my memory. And I know nobody remembers everything about their childhood, but I remember very little. And I'm remembering more now that I'm doing some of the nervous system work. So I'm actually having a lot of memories come back that I had forgotten. But what I do remember is at a very young age, I remember having a lot of pain and weakness in my legs and really kind of having to drag myself along the floor sometimes at like ages 7, 6, and 7. And that's not normal. But at the time, I was very driven person. I was the oldest child. I had 3 younger siblings, so I kind of was the one who had to be responsible and was mommy's big helper. And when I would complain of issues, it was just dismissed or ignored, or you're faking, or you're just trying to get attention. And, at that age, you're not doing that. Um, so that was one of the first issues. And then I had really severe insomnia as a child, and I would be up most of the night, just completely unable to fall asleep. So I was so wired mentally that I just could not shut down my brain. And then when I was probably 12, I loved to go outside and play in the woods. We would build forts, and I would come in after an hour of playing, and my spine would be so painful that I would be crying. I'd have to be laying on the couch. At the time, I didn't know that wasn't normal. I would turn my ankles all the time. Those are the main ones. Just a lot of joint pain, a lot of fatigue, a lot of anxiety, racing heart. Not anxiety about anything in particular. Like I wasn't stressing about a certain thing. I was homeschooled, so I wasn't being bullied at school. There wasn't any problems there. There were a lot of issues in the home that I've only now really started to realize how bad it was. Um, so I think the biggest thing was just, having a lot of physical symptoms and then having those symptoms dismissed.
Mm.
And then probably 14, 15, I started having the severe abdominal pain, and I would tell my mom, "It feels like I got kicked in the stomach, like someone just punched me as hard as they could right here every time I would eat." And she would tell me, "Well, you're anorexic. You just need to eat more. You just don't want to eat." And that was not true. I loved food. I still love food. Um, and so there again, just symptoms being dismissed. They did finally take me to the doctor one time. And the doctor said, "Oh, it's not appendicitis." And so they took me home. So if it wasn't something that was a dire emergency, then they wanted nothing to do with it. And I was blamed and scolded all the way home for costing them money, taking me to the doctor when there was nothing wrong with me. That's kind of where it started.
I yeah, I sometimes like think, oh, I wish maybe. And I was older then. God, I was in my 20s when I spoke to my parents about it. Like, I wish maybe they were a little bit more like understanding. But they actually were like, when I think about it, but they were never like dismissive in that way, and the way that could have affected me if they had done that, particularly at a young age. Did you say you were 14, 15 at that point?
Yeah, at that time, and then it started though when I was probably about 7, and even at a very young age, I was told the same things, that you're just making it up for attention, or, my dad would always say, "You just need to exercise more. You just need to get up and go for a run, you need to work harder. You're lazy." And
It is, was your family, very traditional in the sense of having a family doctor and always kind of like, or believing, whatever the doctor said, that was like gospel, that was the truth?
yes, and actually we didn't have insurance. We were pretty low income. We always had what we absolutely needed, but the luxury, going to the doctor was a luxury. And like I said, they took me one time, and they did tell me ahead of time, though, the doctor will know if you're faking. The doctor will know if something's wrong. You can't pretend that you're sick. If you are sick, they will know. So basically, I grew up with this belief that a doctor, if you're sick, you'll walk in the office and they will be able to tell you. And
Yeah.
so I was very excited that when they took me, they would find out what was wrong with me. So when the doctor said it's not appendicitis, which, okay, it could have been a million other things, but it was not appendicitis. So my parents basically said, "Oh, the doctor said there's nothing wrong with you." And so that's it, case closed.
Mm. And it took me a long time, to realize that doctors could be wrong. And because of exactly what you just said, they can't be wrong, because they are the doctors. And um, did you, when you felt that, like at a young age, did you question that in your mind? Oh, they could be wrong, or is it like, well, they can't be wrong, it must just be me?
I think a little of both, because I was still holding out hope that somehow some doctor somewhere would find out what was wrong, because I knew my symptoms were real. And at the same time, feeling that imposter syndrome, feeling like, questioning my reality, gaslighting myself, and being gaslit by my caretakers. So yeah, there was definitely both. And I would go back and forth. I would have a day where maybe my symptoms would be a little better, and I would think, Maybe you really can just mind over matter it and just push through. And maybe it really is just all in your head." And then the symptoms would hit full force. And I'd be like, "No way, no way. This is real."
And then 'cause I always, I don't know about what your view on this is, and this is why I feel like, I'm not saying this podcast something like this is amazing. It's more just that initial, if someone was able to have like a little bit of care and positivity and understanding at that initial point of there's something wrong with me, how different could the future be for them, if that makes sense. So if at that point, if you had, your caregivers saying, "Yeah, I understand there's something wrong. We won't stop until we sort this. I hear you." And then the same message from that doctor. And then also you're hearing about other people, recovering from other similar things. Suddenly life isn't so scary, and, things are a little, and I just wonder, do you think, I personally feel like that initial entry point into chronic illness, that's probably not a great way to describe it, if that was handled a lot better, the the overall like time that people experience these issues would be a lot shorter and a lot more bearable. What do you think?
Yeah, certainly. When things got really bad was after the birth of my third child. And it was to the point where it was undeniable. Something was wrong. My body was falling apart. I'd had 11 surgeries. I'd had a total hip replacement. I had, been on a PICC line, TPN, I mean, the whole deal. And at that point, it was it was like I was just desperate to put a label to it, to find out what it was, um, because then I would be able to say, "See, I am sick. see, it's real.
Yeah.
And that was the biggest thing, I think, is just being able to validate to myself that I haven't been faking, that this is real, that I am suffering. But of course, this was before I knew what I know now. But at the time, it was like you said, just having a doctor to be able to look at you and say, I know something's wrong. We don't know what it is, but we won't stop until we figure it out. Like that would have just been incredible. But thankfully, through the internet, there are ways to kind of piece your symptoms together and go to a doctor and say, hey, if you find the right doctor who doesn't have a huge inflated ego and they're willing to say, oh, yeah, let's test for this or that. And that's really how I got my diagnoses, is I was able to have a doctor with an open mind. And I actually had a doctor who was doing prolotherapy on my shoulder. And I kept having to come back, and it was this joint, and then it was this joint, and then it was this joint. And I'm like, why are all my joints hurting? And why do I need this all of a sudden? I'm not active. I'm not in sports. Haven't had any injuries. And he said, have you ever heard of Ehlers-Danlos? And I said, no. And so he said, you need to look that up. And of course, all the symptoms were perfect, a perfect match. And so I ended up getting that diagnosis from multiple doctors. That was a pretty open and shut case. But then all of the other ones took, more time, years to get diagnosed and to get at least some symptom management, some comfort care for those.
So, so we know the timeline of events here. Apologies, I was kind of like asking some questions that weren't actually more related to the story. And you, 15, 16, your things start to get really bad. At what point do you get the diagnosis? And how do you pronounce that? Sorry, I have heard of it before, but how do you pronounce it again?
Ehlers-Danlos, or Ehlers-Danlos.
Ehlers-Danlos.
It's yeah, it's a connective tissue disorder, and there's actually 14 different types. And the biggest thing that I would say to anyone watching this is the hypermobile type. They have never found a genetic cause for this particular type. And all of the others, or most of the others, they have a gene that they can identify as the cause. And so there are some people out there who are talking about some possible causes of Ehlers-Danlos, and I'm going to be very careful because I'm not a professional. But from what I've learned, look into MCAS, mast cell activation syndrome, because when the mast cells degranulate, they produce a substance called elastase 2. And elastase 2 acts as a meat tenderizer, basically, on your connective tissue. So in my case, I had severe MCAS. It was causing my connective tissue to degrade throughout my body, which caused systemic issues. And then I had multiple other diagnoses in addition to that. But when I healed my MCAS, it healed my Ehlers-Danlos and many, many of my other issues. But what was underlying that was the dysregulated nervous system. So just keep that in mind, that Ehlers-Danlos, if you have the hypermobile type, may not be a life sentence. It is curable. And you won't be told that by your doctor.
Yeah, that's why we need people like you coming and telling their stories. There will be so many people out there with that diagnosis right now, believing that that is their future.
Like I did. I
Yeah,
believed it was incurable. I believed I'd never be able to lift my child ever again. I'd never be able to work out at the gym. I'd never be able to. I mean, I was in a wheelchair. I used a walker. I used forearm crutches, depending on the day. Um,
so you got that diagnosis after your third child, was that?
yes, right after. Mhm.
So, how many years had passed since you like had first started getting like really sick when you were like 14, 15?
So I started having the symptoms that were um noticeable enough to impact my life when I was about that age. And then between that time and when I got my diagnosis, it was probably about, see, that 14 to 24, and that was about 34. So about 20 years went by, and all that time I was just pushing myself every day to try to function, believing that what I was feeling was just normal, because I didn't know anything different. I never experienced a life where I have muscle strength and I don't have pain. Like, it was just normal for me to wake up every single day for 20 years in pain. And with my heart rate, 170, to be standing at the sink trying to do dishes, about to pass out. Like, that was just my life.
Yeah.
And I was busy taking care of my children, and we had a homestead and milking goats and doing a garden and trying to do these things. And it was really just survival mode for all that time. And then after the birth of my third child was when my body just said, I've had enough. And I could not push through anymore after that. It was impossible.
Yeah. The way I see these things, I don't know if you agree, is that your it's almost like your body's like, I'm going to give you a chance. I'm going to give you a chance. If you don't learn your lesson, I'm gonna make you learn it. And it does give you a lot of different chances. And then suddenly it's like, okay, well, no, I need to slap you in the face for you to really understand this. And unfortunately, it sounds like you got a hell of a whack. So wow, that's a long time to be dealing with that. And then for that to, at that point, when you got that diagnosis, how was it handled by the doctors? Were you told, look, this is incurable, things are going to get worse? Were you told that?
Yes, it was.
Right. Okay. And so what was your action then? Because that in itself, with all of the other ways things were handled earlier on in your life, that in itself is kind of like traumatic. How did you handle that, and what was life like in that time initially after that diagnosis?
I felt a lot of things. At first, I think the primary emotion that I felt was relief and validation, even though, you know, nobody wants to be told you're not gonna get better. It's all I'd ever known. It's all my life had ever been, was suffering to some degree or another, and then it just got worse and worse. So in my mind, it was, okay, finally somebody believes me. Finally, I have a name for this beast, and now maybe this will open doors for treatment, or at least, things to make me more comfortable, ways to improve my life. So at that time, it wasn't really so much devastation over this isn't going to get better. It was more, okay, well, now maybe we can put together a game plan of how to support me and give me a little bit more quality of life. I think the hard part was when I was told that it was genetic, because of course then I'm looking at my children thinking, are they gonna have it?
Yeah. Yeah. God. And is that what they say? Is that what they say then, that it's going to be genetic?
Yes, that's what they said, but from my research, I'm at the point where I do not believe that the hypermobile type is genetic. I don't believe that,
Yeah. Yeah.
and there's no evidence to support it.
So, so you've got this diagnosis, and then uh, could you talk us through the next few years in terms of like how you got these other diagnoses, and then how it came into like thinking about mast cell activation and then nervous system regulation, dysregulation?
Yeah. So that was the course of a few more years after that, and as each year went by, it just my body fell apart more and more. And so my first of all, my POTS started getting worse and worse, to where, my heart rate would be 170, 180, 190, just standing, doing absolutely nothing. I couldn't take baths because my heart rate would be over 200 if I tried to take a bath. So I couldn't do that anymore. I couldn't stand in the shower. I had to use a shower chair. I had to start using a wheelchair. I tried exercising, but because of my joint instability, I had a really good physical therapist, and even she said you can't be doing these types of things anymore, because my joints were just sliding all over the place. And so I got the POTS diagnosis finally. I saw several doctors, and they would just do the basic tests that they do right there in the office, like an EKG. Well, an EKG laying down on a table is not going to tell you that you have POTS. I'm like, it's when I'm standing, so please test me when I'm standing. And they would just, it's like, okay, it's not that hard to just do that right there in the office. So finally, I persisted because I knew that this was an issue, and they did a tilt table test, and I completely failed. I mean, it was just so clear. So I was diagnosed with that, and then tried multiple different medications. None of them helped at all. So I ended up needing to go on IV fluids. So I had a PICC line, and then I ended up with a chest port. And that helped a lot. That helped more than anything, was just getting my blood volume up, because my blood pressure would be 60s over 40s, and that, like, you can't survive that way. And so that made a big difference. But of course, that's not addressing the root cause. Then after a while, even with the IV fluids, even with the medications we tried, my heart rate was still just going nuts. And at this point, it wasn't just high, it would be high and then it would crash, and then it would be high and then it would crash. And all day long, it would just cycle between 40s to 190s. And it was exhausting. And so I was diagnosed with IST, which is inappropriate sinus tachycardia. It's another type of electrical problem with the heart. So I've had that diagnosis. And then, of course, I've had a few different compressions. I had nutcracker syndrome, and I had a kidney autotransplant for that. I had MALS, which is median arcuate ligament syndrome. I had the open surgery for that. Had those corrected, initially did better after each surgery, but then all of those other chronic symptoms came back. Then I ended up with periodic paralysis, which is also a diagnosis that I was told was genetic. Was told it would only I would only continue to deteriorate, and with each paralysis attack, I would have further permanent muscle weakness and muscle loss. It's an ion channelopathy. It's under the umbrella of the muscular dystrophies. And I would be completely paralyzed, not even able to open my eyes or talk. I would have to be carried to the toilet, dressed and undressed. It was very humiliating, very painful, and just completely disabling. So they tried different things for that. I was able to get on a potassium supplement that gave me back some function. So that was really good, although it didn't fix the underlying problem. And then I had multiple other just little ones, Raynaud's. I had bladder issues where I couldn't use the bathroom at all, had to use a catheter every single time, which of course resulted in urinary infections and kidney infections. Um, and on, just lots of other little, I say to the average person, it would not be a little, but to me, because I had such major things going on, these are all like lesser things, but still very impactful to your quality of life.
My goodness. I can't even find the words to, yeah, just to try to like understand how that could have been, and how, you're sitting here now, you know, telling this story, which is why we do the podcast. Amazing. Do you feel just all of these diagnoses are? Did you feel the thing I felt about having that I it always killed me about getting a specific diagnosis or a specific positive test for something was just the hope that I got, because I was like, yes, okay, well, what's the treatment? Okay, cool. And it's just chasing this one shiny object after another. And
Yeah.
then I think, you mentioned it before we started recording, you start to identify with that, and you start to tell people, oh yeah, I've got Lyme, or oh yeah, I've got heavy metals, or or, yeah, all of these different things, and I start to build this identity, which again, for nervous system dysregulation is not very good. Did you feel that, like, the hope that you got through each diagnosis, or in the end was it just a bit, I can't deal with all these diagnoses because the amount you got, like, how did you deal with each one?
Yeah. Um, so it was very difficult as it continued to get worse and worse. In the last 3 years, I had so many stressors in my life that now I know were contributing to my body just shutting down. But at the time, I didn't know. At the time, I was like, okay, all of this is falling apart in my life. I'm having all these stressors and I'm getting sicker on top of it. I didn't realize that it was a cause and effect thing. I was just like, okay, it's this and it's also this. And so, yeah, it was very stressful. And I think the most difficult part of it all, though, is that I'm a mom and a wife, and I love being a mom and a wife. And my calling is to raise my children and to serve my husband. And I love doing those things. And I homeschool, and my passion is to take my kids out on nature hikes and to, we had chickens and we had a little farm, and that was what I loved doing. And so watching every single thing that I loved being taken away from me. I could no longer sing. I could no longer garden. I could barely cook. And I would literally use my walker and I would go to the kitchen counter and I would be doubled over in pain, chopping veggies and cooking a meal that I couldn't even eat because I was fully tube fed for my family, because that's my passion. And being robbed of the things that I love to do and the things that I'm needed for, was very, very, overwhelming at times.
Yeah. And was how, because you mentioned obviously at the beginning of your journey that your caregivers, your family at that time weren't understanding. Sounds like your husband and was a great help at this time. What was your network like at this time? Did you have people that around you that kind of helped you, like friends, or a lot of people talk on this podcast and just in general around, getting a chronic illness. It's pretty bad in terms of, losing friends, but ultimately actually helps you get a tighter group of friends and circle, because the ones that actually truly care about you. Yeah, could you talk a little bit about relationships and how that it was all affected?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it does show you who your friends are. It
Yeah.
does do that, and it's a good thing, but it's also painful, because you realize, that those people never really were there for the right reasons or there for the long haul. And, my husband is amazing, my kids are amazing, I just yeah, I'm so thankful for them, and I'm so thankful now primarily to be able to now be taking back a lot of the burden that my husband was having to carry. Not that I am a burden, he never made me feel like I was a burden, but he was having to take on a lot of my duties, and now I'm able to take those back and say, "Go to the gym, go do something that you love." So he doesn't, because he's not having to go grocery shopping or cook for the kids or whatever. So that's wonderful. I'm very thankful for that. But outside of the family, I found a lot of support online in the chronic illness community. I found a lot of support, from people who are going through the same thing, because those are really the only people who truly know and understand what you're going through. And then I also had a wonderful home health nurse. I still message her from time to time and just let her know how I'm doing. And I had, a wonderful doctor who would come to our house. Is one of those old-fashioned doctors who actually comes to your home. And he and my home health nurse were probably the most caring of all of my healthcare team, people that I felt like really actually did, um, care about me. And that was really the main people. There weren't a lot of other people outside of that, like, in real life, in my physical life, who I felt really cared or would come over or just wanna talk with me. My friend who I thought was my best friend completely ghosted me when I was actually dying. I was ready to go on hospice. I was on palliative care, and I was so bad. I was in so much agony 24/7 that, I told them, I said, I'm ready to just go home. Please, let's just stop the TPN. It was the only thing keeping me alive, and just let me go home." And so when I announced that that's what my plan was, um, before that time and then during that time, she just completely dropped out of my life. Like, at the time when I would have needed her most, she was just gone. And so when I started getting better and she suddenly wanted to be back in my life, I was like, you know what? If you can't handle me at my worst, you don't deserve me at my best. So bye. And
Yeah.
I severed that tie.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's, yeah, the way I see it, which has obviously happened with you, it really kind of, and it's just what I said earlier, really, it highlights all the things that are bad for you, including, lifestyle habits and people, and all the things that are good for you, including lifestyle habits and people. So yeah, and it can be sad, but ultimately it brings what is best for you into your life. That's the way kind of I see it. So going back into the story, I can't even keep track of all of the different things that were going on for you, but at what point did you start to come across stuff that was actually helpful and you could start to see the kind of light let's not say the light at the end of the tunnel. You just saw maybe like a chink of light and you were like, okay, that's interesting. Let's follow that. Like, could you talk us through that part of the story?
Yeah, and I'm glad that you mention it, that you speak of it that way, because it wasn't like all of a sudden I thought, "Oh, I can be cured."
Yeah.
Not at all. I hoped for one symptom to get better, and I'll go into that. So, you had asked earlier about the MCAS, and I completely forgot to mention that. So that was another diagnosis that I had, but I didn't receive that diagnosis until right near the end when I was about to go on hospice. So, as I think happens with a lot of us, we have to be brought to a place where we're literally on a precipice. Like, we have to make this choice of, am I going to continue the way things are, just surviving, waiting to die basically, or am I going to make a radical change? And sometimes we have to be brought to the place where we literally are dying, or we've lost everything and we're bedbound, or to that point before we find the answer. And so in my case, that's how it was. So I had one last hope, and that was to fly to Kansas City to visit the surgeon who had done my MALS surgery, because the stomach pain, undiagnosed issue that was preventing me from eating and causing the crippling pain and horrible nausea to where I couldn't even be upright. I had to be laying down all the time. The second I sat up, I would throw up. It was just awful. So that was what was keeping me bedbound, was the stomach pain and nausea. And so we thought that perhaps my MALS had returned, the ligament had grown back, or the nerves had grown back, or something. And I knew that even if it wasn't that, if there was anybody who could figure it out, it was this guy. And he's amazing. So we flew out there. I saw him. He spent 2 days, like, one on one with me, having me go take tests, reading the tests with me in the room in front of me, going through everything, physically examining me, doing ultrasounds on me, like putting me in different positions. It was amazing. And he said, "I can't find anything." And of course, I'm devastated because I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to go home and die. And he said, "But I think it's MCAS. I think you need to look into MCAS. I think you need to find a good MCAS doctor." And he said, "That's not my specialty, but this is the road you need to go down." And up until then, I knew that I had some symptoms of that. I had the dermatographia. I would occasionally, sneeze and get watery eyes, but it was never severe. I never had the anaphylaxis. I never had throat swelling. I never had hives. I didn't have the visible symptoms of what I thought MCAS was. Well, little did I know that you can have MCAS inside your gut, in your bladder, like in your nerves, like in your brain. You can have it anywhere in your whole body and not have anaphylaxis. It just depends on how it manifests in your particular body. So I went and talked to my PCP. It was at that point where I was telling him I'm ready to go on hospice, and he said, "Well, let's just try a medication for MCAS. Let's try a mast cell stabilizer. And without any diagnoses, without any testing, he didn't waste time because he knew I was really ready to die. So he didn't waste any time going down the road of trying to get it diagnosed because it can take months or years to get a diagnosis. And so he said, let's just start you on this medication. And he did. And about 6 weeks later, I started to notice just a little bit of improvement, and I was able to eat just a couple bites here and there, and some of my nausea was better. And so at that point, I thought, well, maybe MCAS really is contributing to the stomach pain. And so I started researching, and I found the Mast Cell 360 website, which is Beth O'Hara, and she talks about the connection between mast cell and all of these other physical symptoms. She has a symptom kind of like a checklist on there where you can go down and you can calculate your score. And my score was about as high as it could be. And so I knew then that mast cells were causing a lot of my physical symptoms, if not most of them. And so what she does is she talks about addressing MCAS holistically and not just putting a Band-Aid on it with mast cell stabilizers and H1, H2 blockers. And so I bought the book, Never Bet Against Occam by Dr. Afrin. And Dr. Afrin is a mast cell specialist. And in his book, he goes through all of these diagnoses from migraines to Ehlers-Danlos to paralysis to all of these things that I had. And they were all explainable by mast cell activation syndrome. But his answer was just find the right medication. And I didn't want that. So the book is excellent, but he stops short of finding the root cause. So I got a lot out of that book. And then I went and found a holistic practitioner. And I wanted to work with Beth, but she had a really long wait list, so I couldn't get in with her. But I know she's excellent. I've heard from other people that she does great stuff. I also found Luann Hopkinson with Happy Without Histamine. And her program, she had opening right away. So I did the discovery call with her. I watched her masterclass and I got in immediately. After I had the phone call with her, I was like, what do I have to lose? So I really have no other options. So let's just do this. And so I did it. My husband said, what does it cost? Doesn't matter. Let's just do it. So we bought the 16-week program and I got all the supplements. I did the gut test. Um, and the rest is history, as they say.
Wow. That's amazing. And it just goes to show, I guess, when you've got, you know, people who are behind you actually supporting you, how much of a help that must have made. When you compare it to the beginning of your story, when it really felt like you were on your own. Did you feel at that point? Did you feel like, oh, I've got my team here, you've got your family, you've got the right kind of professionals in place. Did you feel a lot more supported when you compare like at other stages in your journey?
Yeah, I would say the thing that probably made me feel the most supported was having a plan, having a game plan, because that's what I never had. I needed a list of this is what we're going to do, and this is how you're going to do it. And, because when you're so sick and you have so many things going on, it is a full-time job just keeping yourself alive, keeping your doctor's appointments, making sure your prescriptions are refilled, running your fluids, having home health come, like making sure you have supplies. It's all just overwhelming just to keep yourself alive. So trying to figure out how to heal myself would have been impossible. There's no way I could have just read articles and, maybe followed this YouTube video and read this book and kind of pieced it together and done it that way. There's no way I could have done that. So with Luann's program, it's paced and she releases modules slowly over time. So you're not tempted to go through and do the whole thing at once and burn yourself out. And
Mhm.
so it's very structured. She has handouts that I printed out. I would fill those out. And I told the family, I said, it's like mommy's going back to school. It's like I'm going to college. It's like I'm studying, because every day that was my job for several weeks, was to heal myself, to do the work, to watch the videos, to fill out the the work that's very important for your brain, the actual physical motion of writing, to go outside and ground, to lay in the sun, to do the somatic exercises, all of that was so important, but it wasn't overwhelming because I had a plan, and that I think made me feel supported. And then also the group sessions. So she would have group video sessions, Zoom calls where she would be on, and then you'd also have some other people that were going through her program, and you could hear the stories of people who were a few steps ahead of you and some people who had just joined, and so that was also really encouraging.
It would be great if you could share the details of that program with me, and I'll include it in the show notes because I'm sure there'll be people that would, yeah, would love to look that up.
Yeah.
And
I will, and I have a lot of information on it on my Instagram, Haven Homestead, and so any questions that anyone has, like, I have highlights on my healing journey, on everything that I've done, and lots of reels, so, and her information is everywhere, all over there. It's just Happy Without Histamine, Luann Hopkinson, and yeah, I'll send you the information so you can include it.
I'm so sorry. I've had Luann on the podcast.
Hi,
Um, yeah, so I completely I've done so many episodes now, and it's been a while since I recorded. That's quite embarrassing. Yeah, yeah, I've had her on the podcast. She's brilliant.
oh,
So
that's fantastic.
yeah, yeah, no, she's awesome. Oh, that's amazing. So yeah, I'll link that episode as well so people can take a look at that. Um, and with regards to like the nervous system stuff, I know you like talked about that and like how could you talk a little bit about that and kind of how that had started to play like a bigger role and where it was that something that Luan had talked about like and could you talk a little bit about that part of the journey?
Yes. So Luann's program is, I would say 90% nervous system work. There is some diet, and it's the name of her program, Happy Without Histamine, leads you to believe that it's more of a dietary approach, and it does include a dietary approach, but the diet is just a temporary. For me, it was temporary. Now, some people may have to do it longer because it may take them longer for whatever reason to heal their gut. But but primarily it's nervous system work. And then the low histamine diet does help to just rapidly reduce a lot of symptoms in the beginning. And that's really important, of course, to help keep you motivated as you're learning the nervous system tools as well. So for me, when I began the program, the only thing that I hoped for or really thought would improve was the stomach pain. And I thought, if this helps get rid of the MCAS in my stomach so that I can eat again and get off the TPN, which was causing problems of its own, then I can deal with everything else. Like all the other issues that I still have, if I have those till the day I die, it's not that big a deal. Even though to the normal person it would be a really big deal. But to me, if I could be able to eat and not be bedbound anymore, that was enough for me. That's all I really wanted. And so when I began the program and I started seeing my POTS disappear and throwing my medications in the trash can, then I saw my muscle strength return. I had less joint pain. I was sleeping better. My RLS was getting better. Suddenly my bladder starts working again. And I'm literally just, my jaw is on the floor. All of these symptoms, I just felt like I was shedding my skin, like a snake or something. Like everything was just peeling off, like I was coming out of a chrysalis and just really emerging as this person that I didn't even recognize, because never in my life, even before I got acutely ill, have I ever felt this well.
Wow.
So all of that was completely unexpected.
Wow. And is it the nervous system work? Is it mainly like brain retraining stuff, or is there just a lot of different things?
So I get that question a lot, because there are a lot of different nervous system programs out there. There's Primal Trust and the Gupta program and a lot of different ones. And what Luann has done is she has gone and gotten certified in all these different courses.
Mhm.
So in her program, she incorporates DNRS, brain retraining. She incorporates all these other acronyms that I don't even really know what they all stand for, but it's basically a little bit of everything, well, a lot of everything combined. And it includes a lot of the top-down approaches, the brain retraining stuff, and then it also includes the bottom-up approaches, the body-based approaches, like qigong and yoga and the somatics. So it is everything. It's the whole package, and then it also includes diet and gut testing. And if you have, she will ask for your labs. You know, she doesn't run labs because she isn't a medical doctor, but she will tell you what labs to get from your doctor. She will, you know, go over them with you. She'll make dietary modifications based on those labs. You know, she really looks at everything.
Yeah, that's really, yeah, it's really interesting. And so what is, uh, how, yeah, what is life like now, for you, like health wise, and how long has it been since you started noticing that initial improvement?
Within the first 2 weeks, I knew that something was different. It was almost like I felt a switch flip. It wasn't like all of a sudden I was better, but at a cellular level, it's like I could feel that something was different. I had this, I guess it's hard to put into words, but it's almost like I had this feeling of hope that wasn't really founded on anything because I didn't really know yet how much was going to improve. But I just had this feeling that things were gonna get better.
Mm,
And the only thing I can attribute that to is the cell danger response, and that when you begin to switch out of fight flight, get out of dorsal vagal, your cells just go, "Ah," you know? It's like they can breathe again. It's like you just you come out of this very, closed, tight place, and you're suddenly in this place where you feel open, where you feel like you can breathe and you can hope again. And I hadn't felt that in so long. It was just incredible. And that was within the first couple of weeks. I remember about the second week in, I suddenly got very tired, not fatigued like the fatigue I had been having, but tired, like I could just sleep all day, and I would fall asleep at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and just take a 2-hour nap, and I told my husband, I said, "I feel so tired, but it's a good tired. It feels like I'm tired from having done work,
mm,
not the fatigue from literally just existing that I had known before." And anyone who was ME/CFS, you know that fatigue. It's like your bones are tired.
yeah,
And so that was what the first thing I noticed was that my body felt like it was working, even though I wasn't really doing anything physical. My body inside was working on healing.
yeah.
So that was my first thing that I really noticed, and then I noticed that, my stomach pain started to get a little less, and I stopped the Cromolyn, I stopped the H1H2 blockers. So people have asked too, "Well, are you still on the mast cell meds?" No, I'm not on any medications. I haven't been on any medications for about 8 months now. I threw out all my POTS medications, all my pain medications. I was on opioid pain medications because I was on palliative care. I was getting ready to die. This was comfort care. I'm off all of those. I'm off all of my potassium that I was taking for my periodic paralysis. That is gone. I haven't had a paralysis episode since I've been healing. Um, and of course, my IV fluids. I had my port removed in December, so I have no more port anymore. It's gone. Um, and that was a huge, huge day for me because that was a daily thing. This was what kept me alive. And the fact that I was at a point where I was well enough to say, do surgery and take this out of me. I don't need it anymore. That was like the final closure when I knew that I was not going back to that place.
Wow. So it's been really a lot over the last year, year and a half. Is that right?
No, really, well, really, I began this journey about 8 months ago.
Whoa. Okay. Oh my God. Wow. That is
Yeah.
crazy. Wow. So I'm so glad that you're coming on at this point. So I know people like to ask this question. It's like a bit of an annoying question when you're going through it, but like, what percentage do you think you're at, like in terms of like, because I get asked it and I'm like, "Oh, God, it's so relative to how I'm feeling, like how I'm feeling that now." Like I watched a video of me the other day where I've said, if I get to work out, if I get to do exercise again, that's enough for me. And now I can. It's now not enough for me. I want
Now
more.
you've moved the bar.
Yeah, yeah. I'm like, no, but don't get me wrong. I'm super grateful. And when I think back to those times, I'm like beyond grateful that things have progressed. But still, there's a long way. It feels like a long way for me to go. But anyway, back to you. And like, where do you feel like you're at now? And like, how much? I want to say how much further you get, because you don't want to say, oh, it's not just like one day you go and get approved. Oh, I'm recovered. It's more that I guess, and I feel like probably, I don't know, maybe if you're like me, I feel like my health now will just be like an ongoing quest to get healthier and healthier, regardless of, I want to be healthier than the average person, let alone the average like chronically ill person. I think that's the goal for me. So yeah, where do you think you're at in that journey at the moment, right now?
Well, I would say so back I can tell you exactly what my first goal was because that's part of the program is to write down goals for your first month. And I began the program at the beginning of July of last year, and I wrote goals for the end of July. And one of those goals was to be able to sit at the table with my family and eat a meal with them. And 2 weeks into July, I had already met that goal. So, I mean, that was incredible. I hadn't been able to do that for a year. I don't know how long it had been. And then there were a couple other goals I had written to be able to sleep, to have actual quality sleep. I met that goal long before the end of July. And then another one I can't remember now, but those were met very quickly. And then, by eat, I don't mean I'm not able to sit and eat a whole giant plate of food with no symptoms, but I was able to eat something, and I was able to be strong enough and not be throwing up and able to sit at the table with them instead of laying on the couch while they're eating. And so that was tremendous. And then the next big milestone was getting the port out because that was me saying, I'm not going to need this anymore. I'm not going to need IV fluids. My pox is gone. I'm not going to need TPN. I can eat now and I will continue to be able to eat orally. And that was also huge mentally because as long as it's there, it's kind of like a safety net, like, "Oh, well, if I get sick again, I can go back on IV fluids. If I get sick again, I can, go back on the TPN." And that's not good for your brain. It was not good for my brain to have that, backup plan, because I need to tell my brain, "No, I'm not going back there. I'm healed. I don't need this anymore." And so, I did have that removed in December, and I haven't needed it. And so, I am working out. I go to the gym with my husband. I still have a long way to go, but every week I'm noticing improvements in my strength. I'm able to do more weight. I'm able to run. I ran over 2 miles at the gym, about 2 months ago. So this would have been like 6 months into the program, into my recovery. I ran 2 miles. Um, and so my goals now going forth, I would say as far as just average function, I'm 100% functional. Like I can do everything a normal person can do. I go grocery shopping, I take my kids to the museum, we go to the park, I've hiked, I work out, we go swimming. I mean, I cook, I'm on my feet virtually all day. I don't have to stop and take rests in the middle of the day anymore. I take intentional breaks to do things like qigong and, nervous system work, but not because I am falling down, not because I can't physically stand. And so my goals going forth is it's really more, it's not so much physical improvement, physical healing. It's more continuing to work through a lot of just the trauma from my past, learning to distinguish between is this reaction from a current stressor, a current trigger, or is this a reaction because an embedded alarm from old trauma has been triggered, and learning to make that distinction and separate those things and becoming more and more aware of my body, aware of my reactions and my responses, learning to set healthy boundaries, learning to be unapologetic when I don't need to be, learning to say no when I should, just really becoming a better version of myself, becoming more free to be who I am, not to be what people want me to be. Just all of that more, I guess, metaphysical uh, healing.
Yeah. Wow. And so how long would you say was that period? Did you say it was like over 20 years you kind of have been dealing with this, and this was the first time that things really started to look up? It was it 20 years?
Yeah, yeah, 20 years since the first symptoms really became to where I couldn't ignore them. And then they came and went over the years. And looking back, I can see now, when they came on much worse, when I would have an escalation of the symptoms, then they would never really go back to the way they were. I would have symptoms and then I would have a stressor and they would get worse and then they would stay there and then they would get worse and then they would just keep doing that until over the course of those 20 years until the point where my body just couldn't function anymore.
Mm. It just goes to show, like, I think anyone listening to this, I get a lot of messages who say, no, I've been dealing with this for, 20, 30, like 10, 20, 30, some even like 40 years. Like, it's been too long for me. And I think your story and so many others like it that we've had on just proves that that's not correct at all. There's always hope once you get to the correct root cause, which you did. Just conscious of time, and what I'll just love for you to do, like there'll be people listening to this right now who are in their darkest hour, and that they can't. They've just had a diagnosis that says it's unrecoverable, and they truly believe that. But they are watching this, so there must be something in them that thinks they could potentially recover, or that they are searching for hope. What would you tell that person right now, to kind of give them some hope, make sure they keep moving forward?
I would say you're not the exception. And I say that because I believed that about myself. I believed I have too many diagnoses. I have a list as long as my arm. This might work if you just have mold illness, or this might work if you just have Lyme, not just in a minimizing way, but if you have one thing or two things. But I had all these things, and some of them are genetic. Um, and so I believe that, yeah, maybe some people can heal, but not me. No. So I would say you're not the exception. There are people with lupus. There are people with chronic fatigue. There are people with like literally every chronic illness diagnosis that you can find. There's someone who's recovered from that. And so just don't give up. Just keep looking at the stories, reading the stories, watching the stories, because that's what I didn't have. I never had anyone come to me and say, "Hey, here's someone who has what you have, and they recovered and they're healed and this is how they did it." I had people tell me, "Oh, we're praying for God to heal you," or "We believe that you can heal," or "All things are possible with God." But there's no backing that up. Okay, it's fine to say that, but that doesn't help me if you don't tell me how. How is that going to happen? Like, I'm not just gonna get zapped and one day wake up and miraculously be healed.
Mm.
Um, so that's what I would say is just keep searching, keep finding people who you can relate with, because you may not connect with me, but you may connect with the next person or the person before me. And if I had had that 10 years ago, I wouldn't be where I was 8 months ago.
Mm. Yeah, so true. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. And I think I love the fact that you're doing it so relatively early on when you compare it to how long you've been going through all the health stuff you've been going through, to come and start sharing this now. I just think it's super important and very relatable to people, rather than, waiting 5, 10 years and you know, and I think it shares a lot about you, you know, how brave you are coming and doing that. And it's super important that people continue to do that as well. So, thank you. If people want to reach out and ask any questions, are they good to do that? I think you mentioned that they'd be okay to do that on Instagram. Is that right?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I've had so many people message me already and just, tell me that my story has given them hope, and as I said, when I very first began to recover, I told my husband, I said, "If I can help one person, if I can show one person how to do this for themselves, that they can do this, then it'll all be worth it. All the suffering that I went through is worth it if I can help one person," and I've already had dozens and dozens of people message me and tell me that they're now looking into nervous system work, or they've already joined Luann's program or another program, or they're already seeing improvements from what they've been doing. And like, as someone who's been there, who just wants some of that suffering to be redeemed, that's the greatest gift I could ever receive.
Amazing, amazing. And remind us of your Instagram handle.
It's underscore Haven Homestead underscore.
Okay, I'll include that in the show notes. Thank you so much, Angie. Really appreciate you coming on and sharing your story. And yeah, let's get you back on in a couple of years, and who knows what you'll be doing. I imagine you'll be climbing Mount Everest or something like that.
Well, thank you so much.